Hi, so today we're going to be learning how to play Dragon Rampant. This is going to be a really quick overview. It's the sort of thing that you want when either you've just bought a copy of the rules and you want to get your head around it, or you haven't played for a while and you're meeting a friend for a game and you just want to get that quick reminder of kind of how to play. That's the level that I'm pitching it at. This isn't going to be a deep dive in any way, shape or form. So strap in, here we go. First of all, let's quickly run through what we need to play. So of course you'll need a table to play on, which in Dragon Rampant is normally 6x4. You can play on a smaller table, but it gives you less room for manoeuvre and less tactical choices, all that sort of thing. And you'll need some models to put on there, things like houses, walls, trees, that sort of thing, maybe even a river if you're feeling exciting. Each player will need their own warband. Each warband normally contains between 4 to say 7 units, and each unit can contain between 1 to 12 models. Each player will also need 12 dice and a tape measure that measures inches. They'll also need something to use as for battered markers. They'll also need something to use as battered markers. You can see I use these acrylic cubes. They'll also need a way of tracking strength points. So every unit has strength points, and for infantry, one strength point is typically one model. So when you lose a strength point, you lose a model. With bigger units, so my trolls for example here, when they take damage, you need to record how much damage they've taken. So what I tend to use are loom bands that I'll hook onto them as they take damage. And the nice thing about using loom bands is that as you move them, the loom bands automatically move with them, which is a nice touch, I think. Rather than using dice that either fall off or you kind of move the figure and then forget where the dice was, that sort of thing. And let's not forget, you'll also need the rulebook. And last but by no means least, you will need a nice friendly opponent, because you don't want a grumpy, miserable opponent, do you? Throughout this video, I'm going to be using this warband here as my example warband, and at some point I'm going to actually use them to fight each other to illustrate certain things. One model in the warband must always be the leader, and for this unit I'm going to choose my chap here who's kind of looks like a bit of a fighting sort of bishop type dude, but for today's purposes I'm going to use him as a mighty wizard. So let's take a quick look at an example stats card for a unit. So you can see at the top of the box each unit has its name listed, e.g. heavy missiles. Then it's got the strength points. In most cases, for infantry or cavalry, strength points will be the number of models. But for some units, like dragons or trolls or whatever, the strength points will be the number of wounds that thing can take. So obviously, if you're using infantry or cavalry, you simply remove a model when you take a wound. When you're using dragons or wizards or whatever, you need to indicate that they've been wounded and damaged. The cost is obviously how many points it costs to take that unit. So then you have attack, shoot and move. These are the orders that you can give the units, and the numbers next to them are the numbers that you need to activate that order for that type of unit. Next you have the armour, which is how many hits your opponent needs to get on your unit before it loses a model. Next you have courage, which is obviously how brave the unit is and what its morale is like. Next you have the attack value, which is what it actually needs to hit. If it's got a shoot value, then, which obviously not everything does, not everything shoots, you know, only bows and other wild things that shooty things. But if it does have a shoot value, then this is, if the first number, like i.e. 4+, will be what you need to hit, and the second number, 18 inches, is obviously the range of the weapon. Then you've got the movement, which again, maximum movement is in inches. So for heavy missiles, it's for example, it's 6 inches. So next you have the defense value, and the defense value is what you need to hit your opponent if you've received a charge, i.e. if you're the defender. And then finally, any special rules are listed. When you're building your warband, what you'll do is put your units together with using the appropriate number of points, and then you can add fantastical options for fantastical rules to them, fantastical abilities. Things like spells, or flying, or fire, whatever. In a standard game of Dragon Rampant, you're playing with a 30-point warband. So let's take a quick look at the example warband we've got here. So first of all, we've got our heavy cavalry, so that's 4 points. Then we've got our foot knights, which I've put as elite infantry. They're worth 6 points. Then we have our grisly old trolls back here. Now they're worth 6 points and they count as greater beasts, but trolls obviously have regeneration, so I've given them the regeneration fantastical rule, which costs 3 points, bringing their total up to 9 points for this unit. Then we have our cannon, which is 4 points because I've made that a heavy missile. And last but by no means least, we have our illustrious leader, our mighty wizard. So what I've done is I've built him as a heavy foot unit. So even though he's not a heavy foot unit, he counts as a heavy foot unit, and he has the stats of a heavy foot unit. But he also has the additional thing of being a spellcaster. Now I've made him a level 2 spellcaster, which means that he gets 2 colours of magic. So I know it might seem a little bit strange having a single figure count as a whole unit. I mean, what's all that about, right? But the way the author describes that is that he says that that magic user is like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, and he gets in when he's fighting. He's using a mix of combat, but also special up close magic that is kind of abstracted. So I think it makes sense. Anyway, you can have great fun building your warband, so do dig into all the rules, especially the fantastical rules, because that is what makes Dragon Rampant fantastic, is the fantastical rules, get it? So let's have a quick look at the game conventions. First of all, when you're measuring distances, you measure from the nearest unit to the nearest unit. Fractions are generally rounded down. There's no facings on a unit, so there's not like this is the front, this is the back of the unit. It doesn't matter. The idea is that it's a small skirmish game, and generally the figures are kind of looking around to the warriors, we should say, are looking around to see what's what, and they've got a good understanding of what's around them because they're in battle and they're wired, man. They're pumped, baby. So when you're playing the game, all models within a unit must be within 3 inches of another model in that unit. And also, each unit needs to stay at least 3 inches apart from any other friendly unit, or in fact any other unit, unless it's an enemy unit that it's charging into hand-to-hand combat. Leaders must be part of a unit and cannot leave that unit. So if my leader, let's say I'd chosen this chap to be my leader, I couldn't at any point trot him over and have him join these guys. He has to remain as part of that unit, and he has to be a part of the unit. Leaders within 12 inches of other units, give them a +1 on their courage tests. If the leader's unit is battered, then the leader's rules don't count. There are 5 types of terrain in Line Rampant. You have rough terrain, obstacles, obscuring terrain, cover, and impassable. Before you start playing the game, it's important that you agree with your opponent what the terrain will count as. Now, when you're playing Dragon Rampant, you'll be playing a scenario. Now, I'm not going to go into scenarios today, but they are very important, and they start on page 166. The reason that I'm not going to go into them is that they're too wide, too varied, and I'm just going to give, as I said before, I'm just going to give an overview of the basic rules in this video. But the scenarios do describe how to set up your board, how to start your game, and also what the victory conditions and the end conditions of the game will be. So let's talk about what you do in a turn. The first thing that you have to do is see if you can rally any battered units. Now, to rally, a unit does a courage test, which I'll get into a bit later. If the unit succeeds, then the battered marker is removed. But if it fails, the unit loses 1 strength point and the battered marker remains. A failed rally doesn't end the activation for the player, but it does mean that they can't activate that unit again in the standard move later on. The next thing you do is you check to see if any of your units have the wild charge special rule, and if they're close enough to do wild charges. If they are, then you need to be doing that. If it fails the test to do a wild charge, you can still give it a normal move action. After that, you're into standard activations, and it's all gravy, baby. Each unit only activates once. Finally, once you've dealt with rallying units and wild charging units, you can then deal with the bulk of your army and issue any standard activations that you have. These can be either move orders, shoot orders, or charge orders, or attack orders, but charge sounds much more fun. The values that they need to roll for those things are listed on the unit stats card. So in order to successfully activate your unit, you roll 2 dice, and that number must be equal to or higher than the number required. The trolls, for example, are greater war beasts, and they attack on a value of a 5+. So I take 2 dice, I roll them, and I get a 3. So that means that they stand there and they do nothing. They're not moving. But not only that, because I've failed, actually that's the end of my activation and the end of my turn, and the turn goes over to my opponent. Now, if I'd been successful and I'd rolled, say, a 10. If I'd rolled a 10, then I would have activated my troll. Once that's finished, I would then have gone on to activate my next unit until all of my units had activated, at which point it would then be the start of my opponent's turn. So just to be super clear, if you fail an activation, it's the end of your turn and the turn moves over to your opponent and it's the start of their next turn. So now we're on to movement, and let's say that I want to move my trolls. The trolls have a movement value of 6, which means that on 2 dice I need to get a 6 or more. I score 11, the trolls are rocking and rolling, they can't get enough of it, son. And I'm just going to read a quick list of what the move distances are. First of all, you have riders and lesser war beasts, and they move at 12. Then you've got all other mounted that are moving at 10. You've got bellicose foot, what a great word that is, bellicose, love it. Lightfoot and scouts that all move at 8 inches, and all other foot moves at 6 inches. When you're dealing with rough terrain, that halves the movement as the unit's going through it. With obstacles, you move up to the obstacle, then your turn ends, and then the following turn you'd hop over and continue your movement as normal, and it would be your full movement. So let's say, for example, we have a mighty wall of dice here, and the greater war beasts will count as other mounted, I believe. So they have a move of 10 inches normally, but this is an obstacle. So what they're going to do is they're going to move up. So they've got 3 inches to get up to the mighty wall of dice. And the rest of their 7 inches are wasted. But the next turn, they move their full 10 inches as normal, and they're rocking and rolling, and off they go. Then obviously impassable terrain has a certain effect on movement, and to be honest, if you can't imagine what impassable terrain does, Wargaming is probably not for you. You probably need something a little more simple. So now we're on to shooting. And again, to activate for shooting, you take your 2 dice and you need to score better than the shoot value. If you're shooting with a full unit, then you'll pick up 12 dice and you'll roll 12 dice. And so then what you're doing is you're then looking at the shoot value of your unit to see what you needed to hit your target. So if we say that we had light missiles shooting, they need a 5+ to hit. So if we look at our dice here and take away the ones that are not scoring, because I have, oh my, look at that, there's been some deadly shooting there. So we've got a total of 7 hits, which is stunning shooting. So with those 7 hits, if we say that they were targeting our trolls again, we're sticking with the poor old trolls. The trolls have got an armor value of 4, which means that it takes 4 hits for a troll to be wounded. So as you can see, we've got 7, so that means that we've only got 1 hit on the troll. So at this point, we'd be sticking a wound on them to indicate that they've taken a hit and one of their strength points has been lost. Okay, so before we move on to attacking and close combat and all that sort of fun stuff, I just want to say a big thank you to CMA Creative Solutions for supporting the channel. CMA have been creating metal and resin miniatures for the wargaming and modelling industries for a number of years now, for over 30 years I believe, and they're a fantastic company and I've really appreciated their support. Now if you like the cut of my jib and you'd like to support Pursuit, please do join our Patreon. That would be absolutely fantastic. You can do that by going onto the Patreon app and searching for Pursuit, or you can follow the link below in the description. Okay, so now we're getting on to the hand-to-hand combat, the attack, the big old bust-up, baby. So first of all, you order your unit to attack and you roll 2 dice to see if they attack. I've rolled an 11, a mighty 11, which means that my boys are rocking and rolling. The charge has happened, they're moving. So once you've done that, your opponent, if they have either the evade or the countercharge rule, will get to react and respond. If they don't, then they just have to suck it up and take it, baby. You move all of your figures up to into contact with the opponent. If your opponent's countercharge, then you can move them halfway to meet in the middle. Otherwise, your unit just moves up. If one figure gets in, then they all get in, regardless of the distance of any stragglers behind. It doesn't matter. They just get a wiggle on and they get in anyway. So then you're rolling to damage. The attacker will use the attack value and the defender will use the defense value. Both players will roll either 12 dice or 6 dice, depending on whether they're playing with a unit that's above or below half strength. So let's say you need a 4 to hit. You roll the 12 dice and any 4s. So in this example, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've scored 5 hits. The defender will do the same and compare that with their defense value. You then look at your opponent's armor value and remove the appropriate number of models. So let's say you have an armor value of 3 and you've scored 5 hits, then you take off 1 figure, or remove 1 strength point, I should say, because a figure could be a strength point, or if you're dealing with something like a troll, then a figure is several strength points. So both sides do that. Once you've finished working out who's killed who and what's what, both players then need to do courage tests for their units. And I'll get onto courage tests in just a second. If after having done the courage test, both units are still standing there, then the unit that's taken the most losses will be forced to retreat. If at any point during the retreat they come in contact with a base edge, they're gone, they're out of there. The whole unit they've legged it, baby. But if they both suffered the same number of casualties, or neither opponent took any casualties, then it's the attacker that is bounced off and is forced to retreat. So I've mentioned courage tests a couple of times, and let's go through that in a little bit of detail now. So when you do a courage test, what you'll need to do is you'll need to start off by rolling 2 dice. And you're looking for a high number, so in my example here, 3 is looking pretty bad. Once you've rolled your dice, you'll deduct 1 point for each strength point that your unit has lost so far. So you'll also deduct 1 strength point if your unit has taken over 50% losses. So let's say that you're playing a 30-point game and you've lost 16 points worth of units. In that case, your warband as a whole is in bad shape. So again, you'll lose 1 point off of your courage test for that. So if your final number is greater than or equal to the unit's courage value, then you're all golden, the unit stays, no problem, lovely jubbly, baby.
Yay, lovely jubbly!
If, however, your total is below 0, then in that case, the unit is completely gone and it's routed, it is out of there, it's run away, it is no longer on the table, it's no longer in the game, it is gone. But if the result is between 1 and your unit's courage value, then that means that the unit is battered, which means that it will take one of these battered markers and you'll be putting that with it, and also it will have to retreat as well. Now, when you started the courage test, if the unit was already battered at the point that you started it and you get another battered result, then not only do you count as battered and have to retreat again, but you also lose another strength point. So finally, we're on to the fantastical rules. Dragon Rampant wouldn't be a proper fantasy wargame without some magic and some fantastical shizzle, baby. As this is supposed to be a quick overview, there's far too much detail in the fantastical rules and about the spells for me to go into each and every one in detail. That would be a whole video in and of itself. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to mention it at a high level. But you really do need to take your time and go through the book and look at the rules for those things that apply to the models that you're wanting to play with. I've mentioned it before, but spellcasters should be treated as whole units rather than individual models. So when you're casting spells, each spell has a different difficulty, which acts as a difficulty score, which again, to cast that spell, you'll need to roll that number or higher on 2d6 in the same way you would to activate another unit doing a normal move or attack or shoot. If your spellcaster is at 50% strength or less, then you need to deduct 1 when you're testing to see if you successfully cast that spell. Spells and spellcasting are covered in detail in Chapter 4, and do have a dig into that. It's really entertaining and a really good read, and Daniel Mersey does have a great turn of phrase, so do have a look at that. So that's Dragon Rampant. It's a great game, full of flavour, full of fun. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more of the videos that I've done on the Rampant series of games, do check out this link right here. Thank you, goodbye.